look, the truth is you're judged by your decisions at the quarterback position. And the first mistake he made was he goes and he drafts Brock Osweiler, who's best friends with his son. And that was a huge mistake. Okay? Your best friend's my son at Arizona State, so I'm going to take him and make him my franchise quarterback. And then he doubles down by offering Brock Osweiler. Remember, people, when Brock Osweiler left and went to Houston, he left for $1 million more because he was mad because Peyton got his job back for the playoffs. And but John Elway had still offered him like $15 million a year. It wasn't that he didn't like Brock. He just wasn't willing to go to war for him. Mm-hmm. Then he wanted to trade for Colin Kaepernick, but wanted to lowball Colin Kaepernick. Kaepernick's now out of the league, but because he wanted to lowball him, he went for a year with Trevor Siemian as his quarterback. And he drafted Paxton Lynch somewhere in that mix as well, who hasn't panned out. I actually think he's a pretty good general manager. I think it's really hard sometimes for superstar players to be evaluators of even their own position. Take Michael Jordan, who wasn't a good evaluator when he was in Washington, hasn't been a good evaluator in Charlotte. Doesn't take away from how good a player he is or the type of presence he has, but sometimes it's hard to get down to the nuts and bolts of what makes a great player even at your own position.
Well, I think it took a lot of courage for him to draft somebody in the first round and sit him third on the depth chart and put somebody as a later draft pick that probably wouldn't make the team at any other time. So, I mean, you got to give him credit for that. I think he has not done an outstanding job, but he hasn't done a poor job either because he did get a Super Bowl out of the deal. He did bring in Peyton Manning. He convinced Peyton Manning to trade in his Indianapolis uniform to come to Denver and win a championship, and he did that. So how many GMs in that span of time have gotten a Super Bowl ring? So we have to give him credit, so we can't just say he's a bad GM. They didn't draft well. He only has 10 starters. Yes, no Pro Bowls, but at the end of the day, it's about winning championships. And John Elway brought another championship that he didn't play in back to Denver.
Okay, but how long can he, keep saying, well, I got Peyton Manning, we won a title X amount of years ago? Like, how many more years can he do that if Case Keenum flops? Okay, he picked up Case Keenum in free agency. What if Case Keenum's terrible and Paxton Lynch, is a disaster? Like, at what point do you say, man, Elway's personnel decisions, Doug, you made a great point. Like, listen, he can see the field as a quarterback. He's drafted some good defenders, okay? Quarterback has not been his spot, despite being, a top 10 quarterback all time. For some reason, he can't seem to identify one. It's a little mystifying.
It's really hard.
He's a little overrated.
Yeah, but I would say this. Look, it's really hard. And to Ty's point, okay? To Ty's point, Bucky, you know this. It wasn't just they won a Super Bowl. When they won a Super Bowl, Peyton Manning was on his last leg. He was awful that year. They won it because of the rest of the team. All the guys that he had put in place.
Well, not all of them. I mean, he inherited some of them. He was in the front office above the GM. But
look, I think his best quality is he has some lower intestinal fortitude. Right? He didn't get caught up in the Tebow thing. Right. Tebow won him a playoff game, and he was cool with bidding adieu to Tebow to get Peyton Manning in. And when he brought Peyton Manning in, who didn't play for a year, he through 50 touchdown passes.
A Hall of Famer, come on, like Peyton Manning.
Yes, but how many general managers will get rid of a young quarterback in his, second year in the league and get rid of him after he wins a playoff game against the Pittsburgh Steelers? Very, very few. He has some lower intestinal fortitude.
He definitely does. I think what you have to judge, I'm looking at 48 players drafted, 10 starters, no Pro Bowlers. The thing that you look at, teams are really comprised of first-round players. When I look at the starters, most of the starters are first-round players. Gary Bowles, Bradley Roby, Bradley Chubb is going to be a starter. He missed on Paxton Lynch, and he hasn't done well evaluating the quarterback position. But it's hard. Finding a quarterback is the hardest thing to do. And when you're a star quarterback, a guy that played at a Hall of Fame level, it is hard to really look at the game the way that average guys will look at the game. And that's why some of your best coaches, some of your best general managers are guys that didn't have decorated careers because they understand all of the process, A, B, C. When you're a star player, you can skip steps sometimes. And I think for Elway, look, he acknowledged the fact that, look, I missed on Paxton Lynch, but I'm going to keep taking cuts. I give him credit for moving on from Tebow, moving on from Paxton Lynch, continue to try and find a way to get a good quarterback in. He is not afraid to be wrong.
And look, Paxton Lynch was well regarded. There's a story out of Dallas, okay, that had the Broncos not drafted him, when instead of drafting Dak Prescott, they wanted Paxton Lynch.
There have been two people that were wrong.
And remember that even Dallas, like Dak only happened because Tony Romo was hurt, right? Tony, and then his backup was hurt too. So he got an opportunity, and he played with the best offensive line, and he had Ezekiel Elliott. That doesn't even happen. Hell, when Seattle got Russell Wilson, they actually signed Matt Flynn. Because Matt Flynn had one great game with the Green Bay Packers, and they signed him, and then they draft Russell Wilson, who everybody says, man, we were going to draft Russell Wilson. Oh, yeah? You had 2 chances to do so. You didn't do it. Aaron Rodgers was, remember NFL draft day? He was the last one sitting in the green room twiddling his thumbs. Yep. He was ticked. I think 23 teams had a chance. So I hear you. I understand that the numbers would stack against you, and I think Vance Joseph's in a really tough spot because they probably should have moved on from him last year. But you can't argue with the fact that they have had, up until last year, sustained success, even with those whiffs that he's had at quarterback.
I mean, I give them credit. They were a defensive team. I think we want to make Denver an offensive-led team because that's what we're used to when we talk about the Denver Broncos and the John Elway era. We want him to find a quarterback that resembles himself when he played. That's not that easy. It's probably not going to happen. They won the Super Bowl by being a defensive team, so I think we have to give him some credit because he helped put those pieces in place for them to have that great defense. So, I mean, I can't sit up here and bash him for doing a bad job.
I don't know that I trust him doing the rebuild because, Bucky, you know it's coming sooner than later. This team seems like it's close to a rebuild.
Oh, they are close to a rebuild. Their defense can't continue to sustain it. They're not the same as what they were when they won the Super Bowl.
Absolutely.
The amazing part is Case Keenum's their quarterback, who's the polar opposite of John Elway, right? 6 years in college, 5'11", right? No arm at all, just kind of makes plays on guts. Like, he's the opposite.
I was harsh on him, Doug. Gee.
No, look, he's fine. He's fine. He was good enough to get to an NFC Championship game last year, but he was the lesser desirable free agent quarterback who was